Hello, folks. Marc LoPresti here live at the NASDAQ market site, sitting once again with Gerald Commissiong, the CEO of Todos Medical. Gerald, great to have you here at the NASDAQ.
Hey, pleasure to be here.
So there's a lot going on in the news about COVID and long COVID, the impact of long COVID. We're finally seeing the government admitting, maybe, that long COVID may be responsible for almost 1/3 of folks that are on the sidelines from the job market, or maybe even part of the jobless claims. We had the jobless numbers come out just this morning here on Wall Street. What's going on with the impact of long COVID?
Well, as we know, we're undercounting cases of COVID, and we have been for a long time since we switched from the PCR tests to the at-home tests that we can't follow. And as a result of not knowing how much COVID you're getting, you can't know how much long COVID is happening. So that only ends up showing up in the numbers, in the economic numbers. And unfortunately, it's a staggering number because about 20% of people who get COVID will end up with long COVID. It's estimated that there's anywhere between 400,000 and 1 million cases of COVID per day going on in the United States, which means 3 to 9 months from now, there's going to be anywhere from 5 to 20% of that number on a daily basis that end up with long COVID. What we're seeing in the numbers is the tail from months ago that we're dealing with. And so this is a crisis that we're seeing in countries that have had significant COVID spread. And it's something that it can't be swept under the rug anymore, so it needs to be addressed.
And particularly concerning when we've been dealing with a labor market that's gone through dramatic changes. We just talked very recently about the Great Resignation and people's reluctance to come back to work. And now you bring into the fore the impact of long COVID. What's that going to do to the labor market?
Well, I believe that it's underreported because, as you know, a lot of people are working from home.
Right.
And so if they're less efficient with long COVID, that's not showing up in the labor numbers yet. As people get back into the office, we're going to start to see that fewer people want to go back. A large part of that is because they're not feeling great. And so I think it's going to be a significant problem with the labor market. Fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of companies have moved to automation already as a result of that issue over the last couple of years and people not being able to be in the marketplace. And we think that that shift is going to accelerate because of the damage that's been done to the labor force. So there's a lot of work ahead to heal the country with regards to this situation. And the problem is it's still getting worse. And so that's really, we have to stop the bleeding first, deal with the problem, then we can bring people back.
And by that you mean we have to continue to fight COVID, right, as the first step in fighting long COVID. So look, Todos Medical, it's all about test and treat, right, T&T, as we like to joke about. What is Todos' approach, Todos and its constituent companies, what is Todos' approach to helping solve, and let's talk first about the COVID problem and then obviously about the long COVID problem. But what does Todos have to help out with this crisis?
Well, we heard from President Biden in the State of the Union a great strategy called test to treat. We're going to find people, we're going to test them, and then we're going to give them treatment right away called Paxlovid. So, on paper, it's a great strategy. But, I used to play football, and we had a lot of meetings, and I noticed that the plays look great on paper, but when you get into the game, right, sometimes things don't go exactly the way you want. And that's exactly what happened with test to treat. The problem is that somehow they thought that they could rely on less accurate testing to then treat people. But if people are testing negative when they're actually positive, they're not getting the treatment. And
they're spreading the disease.
And they're spreading the disease.
Right, right.
And the window in which the treatments that are approved work have to be done very early. The FDA just acknowledged that a rapid test, if it's negative, you can't trust it. 2 days later, you got to take another one. If that's negative, you can't trust that. You have to wait another 2 days. And even then, there's not real clarity on whether or not you have COVID. So a lot of people are sick and have no idea. The other big problem is that the rapid tests only pick up people generally who have symptoms. And we know that most of COVID is spread in an asymptomatic way.
Right.
So the big challenge is we have, as a result of this rapid testing program, sending billions of tests out to people, we've completely lost track of who actually has COVID, how many times they've had COVID, and what's going to happen. So we need PCR testing to come back in a big way, and I think that's starting to see that on the streets of Manhattan.
Well, we were talking about that on the way up here to the NASDAQ market site, and it was interesting, if not ironic, that for the first time I noticed a proliferation of those pop-up test sites really all over the place. But Gerald, I have to ask, 2 billion plus rapid tests that were sent out by the government, that didn't do the trick? What went wrong?
Well, you know, if you listen to the government, you have to take 2 tests every 2 days for 4 days. So that's 6 tests. So really, you say, you know, 1 billion tests or 2 billion tests is actually a lot less than that. And we all know that people may get COVID or think they may have COVID more than once. So at the end of the day, those billions and billions of tests actually didn't solve the problem. And they also expire pretty rapidly, and they're not very accurate. So at the end of the day, you know, at the end of the Trump administration, we were doing about 2 million PCR tests a day. The estimates back then were that we needed to do 10 million tests per day to solve the problem. And instead of ramping up to do that amount of testing, as other countries like South Korea and Japan did, where you see much better outcomes from COVID, we went in the opposite direction of giving out tests that don't work. So now we have to go back to basics and get the tests that work to stop the COVID. But none of that is actually going to deal with the long COVID,
Right.
which is the next major issue. So for us, we do PCR testing. We've expanded our capacity from 5,000 to 25,000. We're going to 50,000 tests a day. We do that over not just COVID PCR, but we do monkeypox PCR. We also have a series of panels, UTI, wound, respiratory, GI, and STD. So we do a lot of PCR testing.
And that's all provided by your Provista subsidiary. Do I understand that correctly?
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit about Provista's capabilities.
So Provista was originally acquired because of a women's health test called Videssa,
Okay.
which is a blood test for breast cancer. That's going to be coming out in 2023. But inside was a gem of a PCR testing lab that already in 2020 had the ability to run PCR tests when very few labs in the country did. So we incubated that, and we started expanding its capacity and really started driving revenue and volume towards it earlier on this year. And now we've established market share in a market that is just about to rebound because all those free rapid tests are going away. So we see really the value in that lab as being able to find people early. And then we've also created a long COVID panel with a partner of ours called Amerimmune, where we can not only do the COVID testing, but then we can monitor people. If you're positive, we can start to monitor and track you to see if you ultimately deliver long COVID. And then we've developed supplement solutions to help with that, and we've got some great data in that area.
So let's stick with the testing for a moment. There's no doubt that we need to continue to test for COVID. We're in the very beginning of the back-to-school season. Lots of kids in different parts of the country are already back to school. You're seeing COVID pop up again and COVID testing restarting. Todos and Provista are clearly well-positioned to help fulfill the need for additional COVID testing. But as you intimated a minute ago, and very few people want to talk about this, but we are facing another health crisis, health emergency as declared at the national level in many, many states, the dreaded monkeypox. You have a test for that? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, that's right. So we waited and waited. We saw it happening, and the numbers just kept going up. And then we started reading the stories of not only were the numbers going up, but a lot of people couldn't get testing because they didn't qualify for tests because the capacity that the country had was so low. We built up a lot of capacity for COVID testing, and we knew that we could quickly transition that for monkeypox. We don't expect there's going to be as much monkeypox testing as there is COVID testing. But in situations like schools, where you could see outbreaks, coming very rapidly, and especially with the long incubation time of monkeypox, you get monkeypox 3 weeks ago. You don't know it until today.
Right.
During that whole period of time, a lot of spread can happen. So
That's not a situation where being symptomatic is the time to be testing, right? It's testing way before symptoms appear preventatively in that instance.
yeah, and you can do that because there are actually solutions. Unlike when COVID started, there was no vaccine, there were no treatments, right? Monkeypox, there's a vaccine, and the treatment's not approved, but based on everything I've seen, it works pretty well, this TPOX. So, it's a situation where you need to test early and intervene early, and it has the benefit of not leaving the scars from actually getting the lesions from monkeypox and not spreading it, most likely, because you're reducing the viral load exactly like we did in COVID. We've learned so much about viruses over the last couple of years that it's really a shame that this virus got out and is now in circulation because we had all the tools to stop it. Now we know already what the next step is. You have to test people that may have it and then isolate them that do have it and treat them. And we can do that. We can do test to treat with monkeypox. The problem is that we're not testing widely enough. So what we did is we have capabilities with saliva testing. Obviously, the big problem with monkeypox is, you want to test before you have the symptoms, but the body has the virus in it for this incubation period, and it shows up in the saliva. So what we're able to do is take basically the exact same saliva sample that we use for COVID and test for monkeypox.
Wow.
And we can do both tests from the same vial. So we quickly got that validated.
So for patients, one swab, one test, not two separate swabs, two separate samples. One sample goes to the lab, and you're going to be able to tell you can test for both COVID and for monkeypox?
That's exactly right.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's good from an optics perspective, I would imagine, too, especially in settings like schools. Not saying, hey, we're sending home 3,000 tests for monkeypox and cause a stir and concern. It can sort of be part of a more broad screening, COVID screening and monkeypox. Let's, very exciting and very interesting stuff. Of course, it's never good that we have to deal with another health crisis or a pandemic, and hopefully monkeypox does not become a pandemic, but it is a health emergency, and you guys are well suited to address it. So let's talk from the testing side to the treatment side, and let's go back to COVID. So government, Paxlovid, right? That's sort of been the primary treatment, but interesting thing that's been happening. It happened, of course, to our president, COVID rebound with Paxlovid. What is that about? Explain that to us.
Yeah, it happened with the president's wife, with Dr. Fauci. The major issues are that, one, you may need more than 5 days of treatment. And that is something that the government's actually now asking Pfizer to look at. Can you treat for 10 days, right? So that's the first thing. So 5 days may not be enough with some of these newer variants that have much higher viral loads.
Right.
You need a longer time to get rid of it. Makes sense. The other challenge that Paxlovid has is there's a compound in the formulation called ritonavir, which is an HIV drug. It's been in the market for 30 plus years. We know that ritonavir damages the endothelial cells, which basically coat the veins where the blood flows through. And the veins, as we know, the blood, it becomes clotty. And you get microclots. That's one of the features of COVID and long COVID. And there's obviously a big increased incidence of cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes after COVID. So taking anything that's not great for your cardiovascular system.
Not a good idea.
It's not a good idea, but that's the best we have. And Paxlovid is definitely shown to reduce hospitalization and death in acute settings. And that's great. But if you don't take it for long enough, the challenge is that there's a high incidence of rebound. In the trials, they said it was 2%. I think we can all agree it's a lot higher than 2% right now. And so what we've been doing is we have a protease inhibitor supplement called Tollovid. We position this more as a cleanse. So where Paxlovid leaves off, we pick up. So, Paxlovid brings your viral load. The protease inhibitors don't actually bring your viral load down. They stop the acceleration. So you stop the ability to increase virus. And then your body's got to come in and mop up and clean up the virus itself with the immune system. So the problem is, in rebound, you stop the virus from clearing, but your body hasn't been able to clear the virus fast enough.
So it's still there.
Still there. You take away the Paxlovid, comes back. That's what they call the rebound.
Because you have not effectively cleansed from the virus. You've stopped the spread, you've stopped the aggression, but it's still there waiting to rebound, and that's what we think is happening with Paxlovid.
That's exactly what's happening with Paxlovid.
So Tollovid, as you mentioned, it's not a drug. It's not being offered to treat or cure any particular disease. It is a nutritional supplement, but a pretty effective one. You've been doing a lot. Anybody that's following the story of Todos over the past few months has been seeing the news that you've been putting out about the trials and the studies I should say, that you've been doing on Tollovid. Tell us what that's shown in the past couple of months about the effectiveness to help to treat long COVID.
Well, first, for people understanding, the inventor of this, Dr. Dorit Arad, who we partner with, she discovered the 3-cell protease. So the target that Paxlovid is going after, she is the one who discovered it. So we've known about this, in our scientific team for 20 plus years. And the studies are effectively showing a very similar outcome to what's happening with Paxlovid. People take it, they start to feel better because there's not an increase in virus, and if you stay on it, over time, you feel better and you get better. The good thing with Tollovid is there's no upper limit. There's no maximum number of days you can take it. I myself have been taking it for over 2 years at this point. And I don't have any side effects. I get my bloods taken all the time. I don't have any, nothing's happened. So we know that people can take this for a very long time. And so in an acute COVID situation, what we recommend is, if for whatever reason you're not eligible for Paxlovid, take Tollovid. And just take it until you feel better, and then you can titrate the dose down. You don't have to take maximum dose, but having something there to stop the virus from continuing to replicate will help you and help your body ultimately clear it, right? Help your immune system respond to it in the right way. And if you do take Paxlovid, it's the same idea. Paxlovid does a great job at halting the acceleration of the virus, but
as a protease inhibitor, right?
As a protease inhibitor. That is the only mechanism of Paxlovid. It's the only mechanism is protease inhibition.
Meaning that's all it does.
That's all it does.
And the active ingredient in Paxlovid that enables that protease inhibition, tell us a little bit. It's pretty strong stuff, right?
Yeah, it's nirmatrelvir. Okay. So it's a compound that Pfizer designed to inhibit the protease. It's very, very specific. Binds. Not as strongly because the virus is kind of mutated around some of it, but it gets in at such high concentrations, does a great job. The challenge with it is that you don't necessarily need to inhibit the growth of the virus, as we've seen with Tollovid. You don't need it to be so, you don't need such high concentrations of it. So you can take them, but even if you have lower concentrations, that'll work as well. So that's one of the reasons why we think Tollovid, seems to work in a similar way, is not because it's as strong as nirmatrelvir, which is the compound in Paxlovid, but simply because you don't need that level of strength to inhibit the virus. Maybe, there will be a strain that comes out, a year from now that is 100 times more potent, and then at that point, that's something that, you can look at. Maybe you need to take extra Tollovid, but at this point, it's pretty clear you see similar results based upon all the data we've seen and discussions with customers.
Fantastic. Tell us about Tollovir.
Right. So Tollovid is a dietary supplement. It's focused on just 3-cell protease inhibition. But, as we know, there are more than just the virus going on. The virus triggers autoimmune problems. And that's really what most of the hospitalizations are associated with. And interestingly, most of the long COVID is also associated with, is these autoimmune problems as a result of the virus.
Which also leaves us susceptible to things like monkeypox and other diseases. Do I have that right?
Exactly. Well, I don't think it's a surprise that the general immunity has gone down, and other viruses like monkeypox and polio are going up.
Yeah.
Right. So these things interplay with each other, and it's important to improve overall immunity. That's something that we here in the United States really need to focus on: improving our health, improving our immunity. Whether you're an anti-vaxxer, you're pro-vaccine, you like drugs, you don't like drugs, we all need to improve our immune systems. So the Tollovir has an additional mechanism beyond the protease inhibition, called CCR5 antagonism. It's actually a cancer mechanism where the body identifies cancer and kills it. And when that is impaired, then cancer can grow because the immune system isn't going in.
Right.
So the CCR5 antagonism basically unlocks the body's immune system to go after the areas that are problematic. And that's why CCR5 antagonists are good in cancer. It's also why they're good in viruses, because it helps your immune system address that autoimmune issue. So the combo of both stopping the increase of the virus as well as helping your immune system not attack itself from an autoimmune perspective, those two things are really what the value of Tollovir are. And another thing that these proteases do is they actually turn off parts of your immune system. So protease inhibitors help turn them back on. And so, it's really a confluence of activities all related to stopping the virus and helping the immune system that are why we think that we have a good mousetrap in this area.
So Tollovir, that is a drug. It's in phase 2 trials, I believe. Tell us a little about where that stands and what the future looks like for Tollovir.
Sure. So Tollovir, originally when we were developing it, we didn't quite know, where it was going to go because of, the pandemic, Paxlovid coming out, all the major pharmaceutical companies supposedly developing products. Turns out there's a huge need for it because in the hospital setting, there are still no drugs that are very effective at helping people get better. Right now, it's a combination of a drug called remdesivir, which is by Gilead,
Right.
Dexamethasone, which is a steroid, and that's basically the standard of care. And the standard of care has not really improved in this area in over a year. And so the combination of a much more potent antiviral that's more specific for coronaviruses, like Tollovir, combined with CCR5 antagonism, which we have seen have benefit, but transiently with other compounds, like leronlimab from Cytidine, lenziluzumab from Humanigen. Those really help, with GM-CSF and CCR5. But if you don't get rid of the virus while you're also helping the immune system, the virus comes back,
Right.
and the autoimmune issues come back. So you can't just treat the autoimmune issues without treating the virus. You can't treat the virus without treating the autoimmune issues. So this dual mechanism of the autoimmune and the protease inhibition together, that's really what makes it unique. We're in phase 2. We generated some very strong clinical data that we announced in January. We've then since seen the biomarker data confirm the underlying mechanisms, and we showed that we actually increase the body's immune potential against SARS-2 as measured by neutralizing antibodies in hospitalized patients in that trial. And now, after discussions with our regulatory advisors, we think that we can basically extend and expand that trial by just giving the drug only to patients, no placebo, and use the historical placebo combined with the placebo that we had in the original part of the trial together to goose the numbers faster to be able to submit for an emergency use.
Oh, wow. And the timing on that, and I know it's estimated and there's lots of things that could impact it, but what are you thinking in terms of when that might happen?
So we're planning to open up that extension enrollment. We've completed the design of it. We've had discussions with the principal investigators, et cetera. We expect to open that sometime in the next several weeks.
Oh, wow.
And we'll be getting data on it. It's an open label because everyone's getting treated on an ongoing basis, and we intend to be engaged with regulators as the data comes in. So, is it going to take 10? Is it going to take 20? Is it going to take 30? Is it going to take 40?
Who knows?
We don't know. That's going to be a conversation with the regulators, and we do think it's also going to be very much directly correlated with what's going on with COVID and the need in the hospital setting as time goes on. Because if you look at what's happened between last year and this year, last year there were about 10,000 hospitalizations in the U.S. on average. This year there's 40,000.
Oh, wow.
So it's 4 times higher, even though we're supposedly past COVID. And there's a high likelihood that there's going to be a new variant coming. And now people are getting their second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth infections. And every time you get an infection, your immune system kind of goes down. So the question of, do you get long COVID, or do you get hospitalized COVID, or does long COVID turn into hospitalized COVID? These are all really interesting questions, because if you start to bring long COVID into that discussion, I think the numbers skyrocket. And that may be, part of the reason why we're not necessarily seeing accurate numbers, because of the implications of what it means if all of these long COVID patients are actually categorized as COVID patients. It would mean that the numbers are dramatically higher and nobody could claim victory over the virus.
But that might actually bring the necessary resources, but as we've seen, the resources from the government, unfortunately, are not always the solution. So let's bring it to a little bit more happy subject. So, I mean, obviously, Todos, Provista, 3CL, the constituent parts of Todos, well equipped to test and to help to treat both COVID and monkeypox, as well as a variety of other things that Provista's been testing for a long time, UTIs and other types of diseases and infections. You came out just a couple of days ago with some rather interesting news about the CBD marketplace. Can you talk about that and tell folks a little bit about what's in plans for that particular business segment?
Sure. So, Tollovid is a botanical, right? And it's a botanical extract. So the same process that you would use to extract CBD, that's what we use now to extract what we have in Tollovid. So from a manufacturing perspective, it's virtually identical. Obviously, the raw materials to extract are different, and that's where we have specialty, and we have IP, and we have IP in testing and making sure the subset of what we get has the protease activity in it, right? So that's our seal of quality. That's our brand. That's what makes us different than all the other raw ingredient manufacturers out there that have no ability to tell what is going to help and what's not going to help. We add several layers of safety on top of that with our extraction process and with our quality control process. Now, one of the things that has been a challenge for us is we have a high price point. We were originally at $300.
Yeah.
We actually did pretty well at $300 with people who either didn't have access to Paxlovid or didn't want to take ritonavir inside the Paxlovid. So that was, good. But once it started to become clear, I'd say at the end of the first quarter, that long COVID is really, it was kind of this mystery, but it's really COVID.
It's COVID, yeah. Yeah.
Right? Once that became clear and people started using it within the context of long COVID, that's when it became clear to us that there's this huge body of long COVID people that have not been able to work, and they couldn't afford the product. So we cut the price in half, which obviously compressed our margins, but it allowed us to reach the community, and it allowed us to engage and get the data needed to really say, look, this thing actually looks like it's really doing something positive for people. Now that is the case, the question is, how do we scale it?
Right.
And how do we scale it, not just domestically, where maybe people can afford that price point, but internationally, where right now 20% of our business is international. People are buying bulk quantities of Tollovid, and they're paying the excess import fees and taxes because they don't. There's no other solution, right? So that's 20% of our business, and we've had several distributors from across the globe want to sell, but the price points don't make sense. So we need to compress our costs in order to make it viable to export at scale.
Right.
And ultimately, the only way for us to do that and control was to have our own manufacturing. But as a small company, of course, getting your own manufacturing facility when you don't know whether you have these other pieces is challenging. So we looked at the CBD manufacturing that had the same capabilities for Tollovid as a way to get in there without spending necessarily a lot of money, because we have customers already for the CBD aspects of what we're producing at that facility.
Okay.
And it has the dual benefit of there's a subclass of CBD called CBDA that has certain studies that have been published showing that it actually helps inhibit the virus from entering cells. And that's one of the things that we found in long COVID. Because we have a testing lab, we're not just giving a supplement and asking for a positive recommendation.
Right.
No, we're actually testing people's blood.
Right.
And we're seeing that a lot of these people, before they take any products, they actually didn't produce an immune response to the virus, which at the end of the day is not that surprising. That's why they have long COVID. And when they take our product, it kind of slows down the virus and it lets the body catch up, and then you see an increase in these neutralizing antibodies. So those neutralizing antibodies are what prevent the viral entry. But initially, a lot of patients don't produce them. Or some patients who are immune compromised never produce them. That's why they're immune compromised in the first place. They can't, their immune system isn't competent. So for those people, there's a drug called Evusheld by AstraZeneca that has been, authorized specifically to do that. But as you noted with the government bought 1,000,025 courses, which is not that many, and only 250,000 have actually been distributed to market because there's no test. There's no test that says you're immune compromised, you're eligible. So we've been working with a lab that actually has that test. And when we find patients that have that issue, if for whatever reason they can't get Evusheld, we recommend they take CBDA in combination with Tollovid. So we see an opportunity to create a next generation Tollovid that has, the protease inhibitor aspects, but then, may have vitamin C, may have this CBDA, may have other immune support aspects to it that could help patients kind of transition and allow their immune system to become competent. And so, these are all supplements at this point, obviously, and where a lot of research is ongoing. But, unlike dealing with, when you look at what the NIH is doing and you look at some of these other things, they're talking about rat studies and animal studies, and maybe they'll start human trials 2 years from now. People need relief now.
Right.
So we're dealing with real people who are already taking lots of supplements. If you have long COVID, I can guarantee you, the biggest part of your budget is supplements because they're trying all kinds of things to see what might help them.
To help bolster their immune system.
To help bolster their immune system. Yeah. And if I were them, I would do that too. And so we see an opportunity to really cater to that market and develop a product that we're going to call Tollovid Complete that adds other aspects around long COVID mechanisms into our pill. So, we have Tollovid, it's very clear, people could take it for years and years and years. That pill, we don't know how long people will be able to take it for, but we've already seen people who are taking these things in combination get better faster. And so you may not need to take it for that long. And you may be able to take it for much longer as well. We'll see. But what we do know is right now, today, it's helping people. And so we think that we can get this in the market and bring this at scale in the next several months and really drive it internationally.
Fantastic. Well, Gerald, thank you for joining us. Loved hearing more about what Todos Medical is doing to help folks deal with these wonderful pandemics and health crises that seem to keep popping up in the modern era. We're going to be very interested and focused keenly on the continued success. Folks, check out Todos Medical. Gerald Commissiong joining me here live at the NASDAQ. Gerald, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you.